Hello, hello, and welcome back to another episode of your favorite podcast, the IBS Freedom Podcast. We know it. We're not bashful. Yeah. Um,
Woo!
Amy, this episode was your brainchild more than mine. So, care
True.
to do a little bit more of the intro?
Yeah, so I thought it would be a good idea just to share some of the things that we're working on to let everyone know too that we are human beings and we are not perfect in our own journeys of health and just life in general, but we're going to be talking specifically about health goals and things that are a work in progress for us. Um, so yeah, I just sometimes there's this attitude that if you're in the health and wellness space, that you're nailing everything from sleep to movement to diet. Sometimes sometimes clients I feel like are a little shocked that I eat, ice cream here or there or, treats or something that they wouldn't expect me to eat. And again, I think that goes for a couple other things too that just pop up during client calls. But yeah, from my standpoint, it's good as a recovering perfectionist to not shoot to perfection, but also you want to be doing things adequately enough to where you're going to be getting the benefits. Um, and sometimes you might fall off the wagon with certain things, and that's okay. We fall off the wagon with certain things, but how do you stay more consistent or how do you get back on the horse? So maybe we can talk through again, one of the things that we're working on and maybe some strategies that we're hoping to utilize to help us stay consistent. Um, we could probably also talk a little bit about barriers that maybe we've had to be consistent on certain things. Or I often find there tends to be an area or two that most people struggle with. What's their Achilles heel? Maybe it's sleep, maybe it's the diet side, maybe it's movement, but usually there's one just part of maybe the foundational pillars that you struggle with. And I feel like historically that's been true. Sometimes it's more than one thing, but I know for me, there's definitely a few things that I'm working on. So I wanted to catch up with Nikki too to hear also what she is working on. And we can just have a thorough discussion on this. So it's like the work in progress episode.
Yep.
Um,
Well, and
yeah.
I like that you led in with we're human, we're not perfect. And we can blame the internet for this to some degree, right? Like, I think probably even before the internet, if you went to a nutritionist or a dietitian, you probably would kind of naturally assume that they had a perfect diet. And if you went to like a naturopath or whatever, you would probably naturally tend to assume that person has a lot of things nailed down.
Right.
But no, like we're all human, we're all working on things. I think it's just some things maybe come naturally to you and some things require a bit more effort. There's habits that have been ingrained for many years, if not decades. We'll talk about one for myself, for example, in that regard. So it's just, we're all working on something. It's a matter of what. I think maybe a good way to frame this is to go back to kind of the foundational pillars or the unsexy basics, as we call it, and frame it that way. So what have we historically said are the unsexy kind of foundations of health? We've got nutrition, movement, stress, sleep. Am I leaving one out? I don't even know anymore.
Stress, movement, sleep, nutrition, kind of maybe say mindset, relationships. I think sometimes,
I feel
but
like that's
those,
under the umbrella of stress, though,
yeah, I
maybe.
agree. Yeah.
Like stress, mental health, kind of, it's a big umbrella.
Yeah.
There's probably other stuff too. Like we could maybe make another case for like exposure to stuff like detoxification, chemical exposure, that sort of stuff.
Mm.
But I don't find that that's quite as foundational as the other four.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe let's start with nutrition since this is a more nutritionally oriented podcast with our resident dietitian. So, resident RD, anything nutritionally that you're working on these days?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the postpartum period has been a bit crazy because things that I used to be able to devote a lot more time to, I can't. Or again, there's barriers. For instance, my daughter is not a great sleeper, so I can't sleep as much. And again, maybe I don't have as much time to plan meals or as much energy to plan meals. Um, so for the past year or so, it's literally been trying to keep it adequate enough from a calorie standpoint has been my main focus. I know we've talked about how I've had blood sugar instability and things like that. And to me, the main thing that made me feel best was calories. So I've been a little less focused on nutrient density as much as I've historically been. I mean, in reality, I'm still eating a lot of nutrient dense food, but just not quite as much as I typically do. Um, like my veggie intake is probably a little less than usual as I was working on calories. So there's that has been a little bit lacking. So I would say more recently, probably in the last month or so, I feel like I've had more capacity to focus on the nutrition side and focus a little bit more heavily on, um, diet diversification again and more vegetables. Because in all honesty, it took all my time and energy to focus on calories for the longest time, or the energy that I felt like I could devote to the diet side was devoted to calories. So now I'm shifting focus a little bit more so back to focusing on veggie intake and nutrient density and things like that. So, from my standpoint, that usually involves um, trying to hit 3 veggies a day. Um, Again, as simple as that is like, oh, am I ticking some boxes here of did I eat a vegetable? And usually it's making sure I eat one vegetable at lunch and typically two at dinner is how I typically skew it. I'm usually not eating tons of vegetables at breakfast unless I'm like out and about and get an omelet or something that has veggies in it. Um, Especially with Cece now, I don't usually do a really in-depth cooked breakfast. Um, but yeah, I would say that's the biggest thing I'm working on right now. So I've been so like my time and energy has been limited, I feel like. So just like focusing on calories was all encompassing for a while, and now I'm making a bit of a shift.
And this is such a good example of the importance of just getting enough food and getting enough calories, but reminds the good people at home why you were focusing on calories beyond like you wanted to make milk for your child. But what would happen if you slacked off on the calorie thing for a day or two? Like, what were the symptoms that you would experience?
Yeah, I would say the biggest one is I would have a lot of anxiety. So I would almost get panic attacky just from low calorie intake. It was very strange and very intense. I had never experienced quite that degree of symptoms from blood sugar swings. I think I've historically been more sensitive to blood sugar swings, but the degree of the calorie need was so much higher than I've ever had before in my life, just with breastfeeding and being active. So it was intense. If I went like a few days where I got a little bit less than I needed, I could definitely feel it from a mental health standpoint was the biggest thing that was most bothersome. I also think you just don't feel super great if you feel your energy crashing. There can be, or sorry, your blood sugar crashing. There can be energy crashes and things like that. But that wasn't as bothersome to me as more of the anxiety type symptoms I would get from my blood sugar swinging. Um, but yeah, that would be the biggest one. It definitely affects my sleep too a bit, and sleep was already a struggle bus item for me. But yeah, if I didn't get enough calories, my sleep definitely suffers too. Um, Partly because my blood sugar is probably swinging a bit in the night where I'm having some crashes. But yeah, so that would be the biggest thing. So that's why it was so important. I feel like it was very disruptive of my quality of life during my day if I couldn't get calories in.
And what's wild too, like, so you mentioned blood sugar, and we have entire episodes on blood sugar. We should probably revisit those topics actually in the near future, thinking about like new stuff that we know now. But I still kind of crack up at the one food that I know you experimented with, like after you went to tennis, and it maybe even pokes a hole in the theory that it was purely blood sugar swinging, because this food that ended up helping you a lot, getting your calories up, you would think this food would make your blood sugar swing like wild, but it was
Mm.
actually really beneficial for you. So it might even go beyond the blood sugar thing. But what was the food that ended up really being helpful?
Yeah, it was ice cream. And again, it wasn't necessarily just ice cream. Like it was hitting a certain calorie point. And ice cream made it easier to do that at times, especially if I was working out that particular day. Um, so again, to me it was like it seemed to be that I had to hit a certain level of calorie intake to where I'd feel more stable. And so whether that I mean I could have done that with other things, it was just like much harder because I would
Yeah.
already eat huge meals and like I was already eating tons of high quality good food. It's just like I needed so much. So it was just
Well, yeah,
it was
like,
a wild experience
you know,
breastfeeding and
the three,
yeah.
400 calories of ice cream is much more doable than 400 calories of broccoli, right?
Right.
There's no way you would have gotten that.
And I think you get to you're sleep deprived, you're you know, trying to manage life with a baby now and you're managing I'm managing a different work life scenario. So just your resources are being pulled in a lot of different directions. So, could have I have maybe made myself a mini meal? Maybe. And again, I'm sure I did that. I know I've done that a few times. Um, you know, or again, made something that wasn't just straight ice cream. I know I've did that a few times, but you get to the end of the day and it's like I only have so much capacity to make myself something that takes any bit of thought. Like I'm just going to eat this on days that I play tennis, which was usually like a couple times a week. And not think about it anymore. So it again, it was a very interesting experiment for sure. It goes back to it's really interesting. There was a podcast episode that was more recent that um, Chris Masterjohn released, and it's called like energy metabolism controls everything, or is the one of the most important things in all of health is that your body has enough energy because if you don't, all like tons of things can go wrong. And I think that that's something that just isn't talked about much in our space or in general is that you need to have enough ATP to do all the things that your body needs to do. And when my demand was so high, just shoving in calorically dense, maybe nutrient poor food was better than if I was just like, I don't have the time and energy to do something, to make something. I'm just not going to eat something. I was much better off eating something because it met my energy need, even if it wasn't necessarily nutrient dense.
Yeah. And I agree. I think that we've seen this a million gazillion times, right? That somebody goes to like a naturopath or a functional doctor or a more like functionally oriented nutritionist, and they'll have 8 million supplements. Like, energy could come up, and then they're
Mm,
given like a mitochondrial formula
right.
and a
Right.
B complex and like CoQ10, and they're given or like ginseng, they're given something for energy, but then the person's not eating enough, and it's like,
Right.
and I think the same thing with hormones. Like, we have a mutual client right now, and she went to a functional, like IFM certified functional MD who's a gynecologist. And she's a lovely woman. I happen to know her. And she ran a whole big mega hormone panel and suggested, well, maybe we need to give you a bunch of progesterone to like restart your period because this woman hasn't had a period in 10 years. Well, lo and behold, she has like a 600 calorie deficit each day.
Right.
And it's like no amount of hormone work or hormone replacement therapy or like mitochondrial nutrients is going to convince her body to have a period, to have a cycle at that point. So, like, energy comes up, but in a much different way in the functional space, and it's enough to drive you bonkers, I think.
Right. Well, it's almost like saying that the body is functioning in a way, saying that the body's dysfunctional, in reality the body's actually functioning how it's supposed to. Like
Yeah.
it's going to shut things down if it feels like it doesn't have fuel or resources
Yeah.
to have a baby. And so it's very natural that your cycle would shut down. But it is very frustrating that that just goes over the head. And it honestly, it's it's a simple question, and I think there are simple ways that you can investigate it. But I also think, unfortunately, a lot of practitioners aren't sitting down and really having dietary conversations with people, and maybe they think we have bigger fish to fry. We are working on SIBO or working on
Yeah.
hypothyroidism, and it's like, well, that doesn't matter. Like, if you aren't getting enough nutrition, you could be hypothyroid. You could have SIBO. You could have all these things.
Yeah.
And it's like, again, it's just putting the cart before the horse.
Yeah.
Like, again, all that happens all the time in the functional space.
Yeah. It's
Um,
well intended, to be sure, but it
right.
is a bit frustrating at times. Um, may I steal the microphone now? May I steal the spotlight?
Yeah.
Oh, mostly because we always joke, like, we talk a little bit before we record, and I made the mistake of saying, this episode will be short. And then we laughed because we're like, no, that's the kiss of death. If we say it's going to be a short episode, it's absolutely not going to be a short episode. So we got through one pillar for one person, and we're 15 minutes into the
Right.
episode. So try to move it along here, people. But I will just briefly share from a nutrition standpoint. Um, I I'm actually kind of working on the way I eat more than what I eat
Mm.
at the moment. I think that I usually do a decent enough job with nutrition, and then that plus like taking a multivitamin every day. I feel like I'm covering a lot of bases pretty well. I think if anything, I'm being a bit more mindful of iron in the last year
Yeah.
or two, and I've shared my ferritin has been like just a little bit out of the functional range. It hasn't been bad, but it's been enough that I'm like, for about 2 or so years. And we'll get to that in a minute. And maybe I'll share in the same breath in a minute here. But iron, I'm trying to be a bit more mindful of nutritionally, but otherwise, like calories, macros, fiber, etc. I feel like I do pretty okay with that generally. And it's funny because as I do chronometer tracking, I'll notice that I pretty much organically hit my calorie need according to chronometer without any effort or without any thought. So it's kind of a fun thing to notice. But I'm trying to be better about practicing what I preach and eating around the same time each day.
Mm.
And I just had put some of this material in FODMAP Freedom as I'm re-recording it and sprucing it up. And I'm chuckling the whole time because like the month of July in particular was just a cluster, you know what? I did not allocate enough time to work on FODMAP Freedom in June, and then the launch snuck up on me. And the whole month of July, I was just like a hermit in my little
Mm.
room, I was staying up way too late. I was not eating at regular intervals like I normally would. I was doing all the wrong things for the month of July, pretty much. And now I'm trying to kind of reset a little bit. So being more diligent about eating breakfast around the same time, eating lunch around the same time, even if that means I stop my filming or I stop reading the journal article I'm on, like, sticking to a more regular lunchtime. Luckily, Mike is pretty good about like a regular dinner time and having things ready. So like dinner is usually pretty on
Stable.
point. Yeah. But lunch is the one that I particularly just have not been super
Mm.
good about. So trying to be more mindful of that. And that kind of segues into the next of the pillars that I'll mention, one of the big things I'm working on right now is sleep. And it affects the nutrition thing that I'm working on because everything bleeds into each other, right?
Mm.
It affects the nutrition thing because breakfast, if, if we usually get up at like 7:30 to get Jess ready for school, then during the weekday when she's in school, I will eat my breakfast at like 8:30, right? That's pretty regular. But then I have historically been a person who enjoys sleeping in on the weekends, slash, it's pretty hard for me to wake up. So if I sleep in until 9 or 10 on the weekend, I'm not eating my breakfast until like 10 or 11. And then I don't want to eat lunch right at noon, right? It's
Mm.
like shoving the meal timing backward
Right.
through the day. But that's something too. Again, I'm trying to practice what I preach as I'm kind of re-recording and revamping and beefing up some of the sleep material in FODMAP Freedom. I've been chuckling the whole time. So I'm like, yes, here's this article about irregular sleep patterns and what it does to the gut. And oh, we need to be mindful of sleep. And then I'm just
Right.
laughing at myself, like, you freaking hypocrite. Here you are. And like, it's just a season. I had no intention of staying that way, but I just had to crunch through crunch time and get it done. But as much as it pains me to say this, one of the things I'm going to try really hard to work on is not sleeping in a ton on the weekends or like when
Mm.
my kiddo is on vacation. It's tempting and I love sleep so much. And I generally do feel really exhausted in the morning. Like I never wake up like Cinderella all refreshed, like, oh, greet the day and sing with the birds. Like I've never been that kind of person. But yeah, I think that again, it's like the sleep thing bleeds into the nutrition thing and throws that out of whack.
Yeah.
And and I'll share one more because it's all intertwined. Is I'm trying to be more regular with movement.
Mm.
So like I got back on my little under desk treadmill today. We just got back
Mm.
from our annual Buffalo trip. And first day back, I'm proud to say I walked on my under desk treadmill during one of my appointments today. And then I'm going to do some weights a little bit later on this evening, probably. But I think I need to get more movement in my day. I'm probably more sedentary than I'd like to admit. And I think that that affects the sleep. And then, like I said, the sleep affects the nutrition because I noticed when we were up in New York, we visited a friend. We met up in Rochester, and they have this strong museum of play. And it's basically just like this enormous building, 2 or 3 floors of toys and crafting things and like
Mm.
cool like VR kind of things. And it's this huge play museum. And we took the kids there, had a freaking ball. If you're ever in Rochester, New York, you have to go there. But it was so fun. But we were walking and on our feet all day long. And I got like 6,000 steps that day. We met up with another friend later that evening and took her dog for a walk around the block. And we were just physically wiped when we got home. And all three of us passed out. And I told Mike the next morning, I was like, I usually toss and turn a lot during the night, especially being away from home, being in a different bed and a
Mm.
different environment. And that night, I think I rolled over and changed positions maybe twice the entire night. And I think it's because I was so physically exhausted from like walking around and chasing the kiddos around the play museum all day. And
Mm.
my nervous system was so much happier and better off. So it's a recent event that showed me the importance of movement, which I historically have not prioritized, and then how that could affect the sleep, and then the sleep affects the nutrition. So, like, that's my biggest mishmash of stuff that I'm working
Yeah.
on currently, and it encompasses three of the
Yeah.
pillars.
Yeah, no, it's you're right. They all do bleed together. It's funny. I just feel like sleep has been a literal shit show just because of having a baby, having a new baby. And I mean, it's a good reminder too that if you're going through a period of time in your life, whether that's if you have a baby or you're like going through a big change and you or just in general, if you don't have the capacity to work on all these things, that's okay too. Maybe you just try to prioritize the things that you know help the most. Like to me, the things that probably were going to help me the most through postpartum were definitely focusing on getting enough calories nutrition wise. There were periods of time when I tried to emphasize sleep more, but my child was not a great sleeper, so I was at her mercy, and she took me to my knees from the sleep thing, but she's sleeping a bit better now, but I do think it has caused me to slip a little bit in different ways cuz in some ways it almost makes me say, well, whatever, I can't control any aspect of sleep. I'm gonna stay up a little bit later, or like I'm not. I usually wore blue blockers, like if I'd watch TV, like that when like I just whatever. Like it's so easy to throw them on. Whatever. I don't put them on at all anymore. Like I just think it made me be like almost resentful that I didn't get sleep. Whatever.
Yeah, it's like
But
you get in this mode of like, F it. It's not
right,
even worth
right,
trying,
right,
even if it's super easy to just put those glasses on your face.
right.
It
So, and I
costs
used to
nothing. It's
be
super easy.
right. I used to be super like bedtime circadian rhythm stuff, no problem, not bothered by it. Pretty good sleeper. But yeah, and I also feel that sometimes there's this urge to want to stay up and do my own thing at night. It's like finally your own time at night, especially on days that I maybe watch CC all day. On Mondays and Thursdays, I pretty much watch CC all day. And it's like, oh, I want to have a bit of my own time to do what I want to do. And then you could get more sucked into doing that a little bit too long, to where it affects sleep and you get into weird bad habits with that too. Um, but early on when I had her, I might try to go to bed earlier at like 9, which I never do now. Now I'm kind of my bedtime's a little pushed back further than I like it. I'd like to really be like lights off by 10 or lights out by 10, but now sometimes it's slipping into like the 10:20, 10:30 range. So not like way off at this point, but I am working on getting my bedtime a little bit more squared away. And like her sleep's becoming more consistent, which makes it a lot easier. Um, but I do think that at times you might have limited capacity to engage with some of these things, and that's okay. You can always table something till a different time if that makes the most sense. You might say, hey, I need to work on movement, but that just doesn't make sense for me right now. If you have a lot of other things going on and you have to prioritize other things because you have limited capacity to take on anything new. Um, so just keeping that in mind as you're trying to initiate habits too, because sometimes I'll even work with people who will come to me for gut stuff, but they just moved and they just started a new job and they have a limited capacity to make change. And so I don't blame them because, again, they have limited resources. So we almost have to decide like what areas we're going to focus on. And maybe you're 60% there on the sleep thing, but we're not going to focus on that right now. We're going to focus on something else and like, gradually work on that as things improve in another area and as more capacity opens up. But you always have your resource bank could be higher or it could be lower, and acknowledging where you're at when you're trying to implement new habits is a good thing. Because you could beat yourself up for not and it's never good to beat yourself up at all either. I think you can push yourself, um, but I do see sometimes people beating themselves up if they can't do certain things. And sometimes it's situations where they have a new baby or they just moved or something. And I'm like, well, why don't you just survive that move for a period of time and then we'll revisit this later?
That's a good point because you're right. I think beating yourself up literally never benefits you.
Yeah.
There's such a fine line between motivating yourself to change
Yeah.
and wearing away your mental health, right?
Yeah.
Like if you could have a twang of, oh, I should do this. But if it turns into this like, I'm a piece of crap. Other people do this. Why can't I do this? There's something wrong
Mm.
with me. If I don't do this, I'm going to suffer this consequence. This is terrible. Why can't I just do this? Like, if there's a lot of that kind of dialogue, then that's, I guarantee to not help you. But yeah, again, like, and it kind of almost goes back to what we talked about with Jessica Brown in a way. Like, if you make a decision from a place of self compassion and self love, it could be wonderful. So, I want to exercise or like get more regular with my movement because I know it will be good for me and I love myself and I want to take care of my body and I want my body to be healthy and strong for a really long time, right? That's very different from, well, my body's broken or inferior or less than, and I need to lose X amount of weight because I don't look good, or like somebody's going to think this about me if I don't do it, or like I need to work out because I know Amy works out and I can't have her like one up me with her freaking tennis all the time. Like if it was that mental space, then A, you're almost guaranteed to fail. And B, it's not going to be fun, the process of that failure.
Yeah, well, it's a really good point. Another expansion I will say on the resource conversation too of, you only have so much time, energy, maybe money to devote to certain strategies. If I mean there's periods of time where you're going to have less resources and more resources. If you are chronically running on a deficit of resources, that's also something to consider. So, is your work-life balance making it hard to make any habit changes? That might be a place to start then of, oh, I need to readjust my maybe I need to find a different job if I'm working 80 hours a week and there's literally no resources or time and energy to be able to do any change. Or again, if you're taking on too much in other areas, I recently saw on Facebook, I had a coach from when I was working out in high school. She did like agility coaching, but she does girls soccer coaching now. And she was just essentially coaching soccer every night of the week and wasn't able to hang out with her kids. I just think it sort of consumed her life to the degree where she couldn't put time and energy into things that she wanted to. So she had to cut back and say no to certain things and prioritize certain teams and trainings that she was doing. But it's stuff like that. I mean, I do think sometimes the way you've structured your life could also be preventing habits just because it's grinding you down a bit or burning you out, and you can't really be able to implement a ton of habits if you're burnt out and burnt to a crisp consistently. And if that is the case, again, reassessing that would be the first step versus trying to implement any of these things. You're just going to get frustrated. Um, so yeah, I wanted to
Yeah.
throw that out there.
And that almost opens up a big can of worms. But I think I'll bring the point that sometimes it's not a matter of taking the supplement or doing the nutrition
Mm,
or doing the thing or getting more movement. Sometimes it's a matter of changing the environment.
yeah.
And and then any sort of behavior change or habit change is going to be a lot easier. I saw this recently. It was on Instagram. I'll have to try to pull it up. I think it was Karen Norden is the account name, but she used the example. She said, if you want to change the habit of, if you want to get up out of bed in the morning and not sit there and scroll through your phone, having it be like a conversation of willpower, you're not super likely to succeed. But if
Mm,
you change the environment and you charge your phone in the bathroom instead of next to your bed,
right.
change the environment and you're going to get the habit change or the behavior change that you want. And I thought that was a really good way to put it. Or like she gave another example, if you want to eat healthy food, buy healthy food, but also put them front and center in your refrigerator and then make the junk food a little bit harder to get. Like I've heard people trying to quit drinking soda, and one easy one is just keep it in the house. You could still allow yourself to get soda when you go through the drive-through or you're out and about or if you're at a friend's house, but just not having it physically in your house makes it so much harder to get because then you have to have an ha over, oh, do I really want to throw on clothes, throw on a bra, grab my purse, get in the car, go out in the heat and humidity, drive to McDonald's or whatever? Like, do I really want to go through that much effort? If the answer is yes, then allow yourself to have the stupid soda. But if
Right.
the answer is no, well, like you just found out that you didn't really want it that bad. But if it was available in your house, ready to just grab out of the fridge, you would have made
Right.
the unhealthier decision, right? You would have just grabbed it because there was like no barrier to making that decision. It's just a quick, like almost on autopilot. You could grab the soda and walk away versus if you have to expend more effort to get it. So, but I
Yeah.
liked that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can utilize that in a lot of different ways as you're building habits of it's interesting. So I see my guitar back there, which made me think of it. There's a lot of benefits in storing your guitar because it actually helps keep the humidity. Weirdly, instruments need a certain humidity, which I didn't know, but it's definitely in the winter time it gets really dry. Like it can dry out your guitar, and you can put little humidity bags in there. But I also find that I don't play it as much when it's just zipped in my bag, which is so crazy because how long does it take you to unzip a guitar from a
You're a
bag? And
silly goose,
right,
but also you're normal.
right. So, but it's the same thing. If I have my guitar sitting on the stand, it's actually not on the stand because Cece was playing with it, but it's the stand's right here. If I have it there, I'll play it in between appointments for 5 minutes, not a long period of time, but that all really adds up. Um, So, again, anything that you can put in your environment more and more from a habit forming situation, whether that's, putting your running shoes out or putting your walking shoes out, getting everything ready before bed. So when you wake up, you can go on a morning walk if that's a goal. Or, like you said, if your goal is to eat more fruit or something, buy a lot of fruit and put them in a fruit bowl in the middle of your
Yeah, make
kitchen
it super
table.
easy so you can almost do
Right.
it on autopilot without it being a matter of willpower.
Yeah, and I will say that another one that I know that they talk a lot about in Atomic Habits is habit stacking. So if you know that you consistently do something every day, you can stack the new habit with an old habit that's really locked in. So you brush your teeth every day, try to do something either like right after you brush your teeth, maybe if it's meditation or something. Like if you want to meditate, do it right after a habit that's already established can help with consistency. Um, but yeah, the easier you can could make the habit to get it rolling because that's the hardest part. I think once did they say 30 days makes a habit or something like that?
I feel like that's the stat that's thrown around a
I don't
lot. I don't know if it's accurate or not, but the
right.
point is it takes time.
Right, right. To really establish it to where there's some resiliency to it. Um,
I
but
think
yeah,
also if you can make things fun or enjoyable, that usually is going to go a long way in establishing a new habit. So if you're not super into movement, maybe meet up with somebody, right? Like you meet, was it your brother-in-law or somebody for tennis?
yeah,
There's some neighborhood friends that sometimes will go for walks and I try to go with them. I had one of my dearest friends in grad school was one of those people who like loved working out with every fiber of her being, every cell in her body. She loves working out and she's so excited. And if I was on the fence and I wanted the extra kick of motivation, like, oh, do I really want to work out on my lunch break or no? I don't know. I would tell Becca, I'd be like, hey, Becca, do you like want to go on a quick jog at lunch? She'd be like, oh my God, yes. And she'd be so excited. And then I knew I couldn't back out because she was pumped.
right.
Right. So, doing stuff like that. Or even, here's one nutritionally. If there's a person out there who's like, I really don't like vegetables, but you give me celery and carrot sticks and a bowl of ranch dressing and I'll just go to town on it, eat the ranch.
Right.
Like, honestly, you're better off if you have the little bit of, or a lot, I don't know, like that one story. that we told in one of the Candida episodes, for example. You're better off probably eating the vegetables with the ranch dressing and just establishing the habit and
Right.
establishing the idea of I like vegetables, vegetables can taste good. And
Right.
then maybe down the road you weed down on the ranch obsession. Like that's
Right.
easier to implement versus the person who says that they hate vegetables and then they're trying to suffer through like eating raw broccoli every day. Like even if you force yourself to do it for a period of time, it's never going to become a habit.
Yeah. No, it's a really good point. Yeah, the fun aspect, again, carrots and ranch is fun, but I mean, the fun aspect too in the movement definitely has been present with me. I think as someone that's historically probably over-exercised, coming from a family where my dad was more of a marathon runner, I just didn't really know the reference point. And it really wasn't fun. The way I approached movement wasn't fun. It was just like 110% all the time. I have to do it. So there was a period of time where I just was like, no, I'm really not going to do any structured movement outside of maybe walking. Um, but then again, pre baby, I started going to this gym maybe once a week, and then I'd work out once a week in my basement. But the gym was great because I worked primarily from home and it gave me a place to go. The same people would show up every week, and it's, a 6-person exercise class. So it's a small group, and there's some funny characters in there. There was a guy who had retired, and his name was Larry, and he was always curmudgeon and like, why am I in this class the whole time? Who was a blast to work out with. But yeah, everyone was like super chill and it was just fun. It was a weird time to go, so it was a weird hodgepodge of people in the class, but yeah, it was really fun. I don't think I would have gotten into strength training otherwise, but I really enjoyed strength training in a group. Weirdly, post baby, I could not tolerate strength training at all. I don't know if we talked about this, but just heavy weights did not feel good with me at all. And it felt more so from a blood sugar stability standpoint. I tolerated the tennis way better for some
Huh.
reason.
I wonder
Um,
why.
and again, I didn't try it a ton because every time I tried, I felt like terrible. So it could have gotten better and I just didn't notice. But yeah, and it's maybe because I was pushing like I, and I could kind of go at my own pace. So I feel like I sort of went slow, but maybe just the metabolic expense of doing more heavier weights was just not what my body needed in that moment. So I that's really what drove me to tennis because I wanted to have another outlet to do something and I've always wanted to learn to play tennis. Um but yeah, tennis has been really great and really fun. Um and again, I do think there's this idea of no pain no gain in the movement world. So the more that you can find something that's just fun, even if it's walking with friends, have a walking buddy
That's
or
all
just
you
listening to
need
podcasts
to
that
do
right.
potentially too. So case in point with movement, um, I, I was a rower. I was an athlete in college and it was intense. Like we had to be at the
Yeah.
boathouse at 5:30, ready to go on our 2 to 3 mile warm up run every morning. And then we would go row for 2 or 3 hours. And then we had to do weightlifting a couple times a week. So like I worked out a ton in college and at times it was not super fun. At
Right.
times it was. It depended on like who was coaching your boat and like what the circumstances were. But I think that it just kind of wore me out on the competitive sports thing for a while. And there was a good long while that I really didn't do any exercise after that.
Yeah.
But when I was still, so like after I stopped rowing, I was still on campus for another semester and I was walking all over campus, right? I would park my car in one parking lot and then I would walk to all my classes. So I probably got a bunch of steps there. Then I did an internship where I was like a trainer and I was walking all over this big campus, training the athletes and demoing exercises. But like I didn't really work out a ton. Oh, and I rode my bike to work a lot because we lived like a mile away. So I was doing movement, but I wasn't doing intense exercise. And I was around these athletes and I had been an athlete previously. So I felt kind of guilty and icky, like, oh, I should be doing this, right?
Yeah.
Like the coulda, shoulda, woulda was setting in. Then even when I was in chiropractic school, I wouldn't say that I regularly worked out intensely, like maybe a time or two a week here or there, and I would go in spurts, but I rode my bike to campus most days
Mm.
to and from. And again, it was like mile and a half away, and I would walk all over campus. And like all of these years, I was no longer an athlete. I was no longer like working out 3 hours a day, 6 days a week, but I maintained my physique and like body weight and stuff. And like I fit into the same clothes and I felt good. And, I gained a little bit of weight and then lost it when I had Jess almost 8 years ago, which is crazy to say that now. But like I was back down to like a normal weight and a normal kind of build for me. And even through the beginning part of the pandemic, I didn't gain the COVID-15 or the COVID-19 that a lot of people talked
Mm.
about in the beginning. And I was really happy about that. But it didn't occur to me until later. I think it was because I would walk to my office or I would ride my bike to the office a fair amount of the time. And at the time when I had a brick and mortar office, we lived about a mile away. So I was walking 2 miles on those days that I would
Right.
walk to the office. I didn't gain my COVID-19. It wasn't 19, but it's a cute name. I didn't gain any weight from the pandemic until we got a second vehicle and I started driving to work. And
Mm.
then couple that with sitting on my butt during appointments and having a small enough office, like I didn't really have to work around as part of my workday very much. It was after that point that I gained 5 or 10 pounds. And it was
Mm.
only like maybe a year ago that I kind of realized that. It was like beginning of 2021 and through 2021, I think I gained a teeny bit of weight. And it's just occurred to me in the last year and a half. I was like, oh, that makes sense. So now I'm
Right.
trying to, maybe I'll do weights a time or two a week. And otherwise, I'm going to work on just walking on my treadmill during some appointments or like FODMAP Freedom Q&As. I could maintain a conversation and walk 2.5 miles an hour and talk to people on the Q&As. And I'm working on some like hip mobility stuff right now. But I think that that's way more attainable instead of me thinking I need to get back to that place where I'm working out like 3 hours a day really intensely and
Right.
competitively. And like, I don't care to ever get back to that personally, at least not at this time in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I think when you've taken your body to its limit with pretty intense athletics, it's hard to want to continue doing that forever. I don't think I see tons of competitive athletes wanting to do that long term. Sometimes I see like the people that didn't do a lot of athletics getting really into it when
Yeah.
they're older.
Well, or I think it's a little abnormal. So I have one uh, rower friend from undergrad who, but she was kind of like Becca. She really loved exercise and
Mm.
she really loved rowing and she was very passionate about it. And she became like a personal trainer. And I see her posting on social media and she does like virtual workout classes and she's always like demoing different exercises. And I'm like, you go, Britt,
Right.
you go. But she's the exception, not the norm. Most of my rower friends that I know from undergrad are not doing anything competitive. And if they are, I don't think any of them are doing rowing. I
Right.
do have a single, so I could go out on the water by myself potentially. I guess that's one other fitness goal is I live in the South where it is hotter than Hades' armpit right now because we're recording this in August. And I'm very excited to maybe like a month from now when the episode posts, I'm very excited to get to like mid to late September and into the fall when it's a much more manageable situation here. And that's when I want to bring my boat back over here. It's at my parents' house right now, but I want to bring my boat over here and find like a place where I can launch it and go out on the lake. But it's going to be a very recreational paddle and it's more for my mental health than anything else. I can't imagine I'm
Right.
going to race in my single ever again.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, I agree. I'm definitely more down to movement that's either fun and challenging or just kind of low key. Um well, let's transition into stress. So I'll tell you that has been something that I haven't really been doing anything super intentional as I have historically done. For stress, it's been more just trying to find previously to the last month or so, I've been trying to initiate more stress management the last month or so. The thing that have landed on more recently, which I loved pre having CC, what is I call it lazy meditation, where I just sort of listen to peaceful music and I rest my eyes. Sometimes I fall asleep, sometimes I don't, but it's usually like 20 minutes on the dot. So I maybe it takes me 5 minutes or so and I kind of get into a zone and then I just either rest or I fall asleep for like 10 minutes. It's like the cattiest of cat naps. And then I pop up and I feel good. So when she goes down, at times I feel like I got in the habit of either scrolling on my phone or just kind of like not doing anything specifically, but I am trying to get into a habit of now that her naps are more consistent, doing something for myself because sometimes then I'm cleaning or whatever, I'm doing chores while she's sleeping. But yeah, I really am trying to prioritize doing something. That could be again the lazy meditation. I've dabbled a little bit in the mantra-based meditation, which I also have done historically in the past, but that just hasn't resonated with me as much. So I'm definitely have been doing more of lazy meditation. I've been trying to play more guitar. Because I got weirdly, I have mom wrist. If anyone has any suggestions for this, but so because you pick up the baby like this over and over again, my left wrist has been giving me problems for like 9 months essentially. So ever since she got probably about 3 or 4 months old and pretty like having some chub to her, you know, some baby, some baby
Growing, growing.
growing, growing.
Poor Cece, having some chub to her.
No, like they fill out a little bit more. That's probably a nicer way to say it. When she filled out a little bit more and she's getting heavier, you know, when you're lifting her up over and over again the same way, it really messes with some of your joints. Now my right one's fine. It's my left one, but it pops all over the place. So there was periods of time where I felt like it hurt too much to play the guitar, or I couldn't do any of the bar chords. So it was just, it's been strange. But I need to probably do physical therapy or something for it just because I keep thinking it's going to get better, but it just doesn't.
What you
Um,
could potentially do, as a quick side note, being the chiropractor of the group here,
yeah,
so what you could do to at least try this out is get a fairly large vessel, like a bucket or very large Tupperware container, and
mm,
put some rice in it. Like just get a cheapo bag of white
yeah,
rice at the store, and then kind of you basically stick your hand in and do this sort of stuff,
yeah,
and you just do movements in the rice, and you'd be surprised how challenging that is. You could
yeah.
feel it, especially in your forearm muscles. You could feel that pretty quickly.
Mm,
But doing that, maybe for like 1 minute, couple times a day, when you think of it, you could have the bucket right next to your guitar in your office. That might be a good little starter thing to try out and just kind of build up some strength and stamina in those forearm muscles. Because
yeah,
there's no muscles in the wrist. It's
yeah,
all the muscles are in the forearm, and then the tendons cross the wrist into the hand.
yeah,
So wrist rehab, in my opinion, is largely forearm rehab. And yeah,
mm,
you'll feel the burn if you do like movements
yeah,
in that rice bucket. Oof.
yeah. But yeah, I think I have like a bit of tendonitis in there. And I just keep thinking, well, she's old and she's like walking all over the place now, but I still have to pick her up
Yeah.
a decent amount. So
And they just
it's
keep getting bigger.
that's true.
I
So like
pick up my 8-year-old, my
I
almost 8-year-old. The difference is now I don't pick her up like this so much, but I do an
right.
awful lot of piggyback rides.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I
Yeah, I
give,
think I think it'll be interesting because I've picked her up less, but she's heavier. So the times I do have to pick her, and I still have to pick her up from the crib, which is there's really no other way. I mean, I guess I could reach around and grab her little butt and pull her up, but it would be awkward, and I don't think I could do that every time. But yeah, I it's that's been a little bit challenging for my guitar playing. So maybe I need to try your rice trick.
yeah.
But
You
I
could
would
even
say
start with water too. If you don't have rice, just fill a bucket with water and like swirl your hands around, and it'll be
yeah.
less resistance than the rice, but that's at least a starting point.
Yeah. And I would say I've been doing those. I would say probably more so prioritized getting therapy postpartum as being a part of my stress management, mental health side of the equation. Which my personal opinion, I mean, it just depends on the person, but I typically don't need therapy all the time. Um, it's something where I've gone to therapy before where you kind of go get what you need to work on and then move
Yeah, like a
forward.
little tune up to kind of get through
Right.
whatever you need to get through.
Right. So that was really helpful and probably took more of my time up earlier on. I think I started going maybe like 8 weeks postpartum, which is pretty early, but I was like, I need to get ahead of this. Um, so it's been like the frequency has drizzled, gone from maybe like more on a weekly basis to then being more of like a bi-weekly and then every month. And now it's kind of whenever I need a tune up or just if I have questions. Um, so again, that was definitely something that I prioritized more so early on postpartum, but now I'm getting to a place where I can do more of my typical stress management type strategies. Um, but yeah, I feel like it wasn't as much of a focus earlier on. Um, After I had CC, it was just trying to get kind
You
of
were
my
just
life in
surviving.
order, right? Trying to get my
Yeah,
life in order and get my work life balance rolling again. And again, working on my postpartum OCD, anxiety things, that kind of stuff. So,
which again stemmed somewhat back to nutrition and getting enough calories and just the caloric demand on your body.
yeah. Yeah,
Um,
it's it's fascinating the different ways that your body can do funky things. But
and and again, how it's all connected.
for sure.
Again, like I mentioned, like movement connected to sleep, sleep connected to nutrition. For me, it it's all this big web of stuff. And I think we know a lot of the connections now, but
Mm.
we probably don't know the half of it, right? Like
Right.
we
Right.
can noodle on the sleep gut connection and the sleep microbiome connection, and like at the end of the day it just goes back to what we've talked about from the inception of this podcast, which is the unsexy basics can and will help. You might feel like your case is more severe or more special or more progressed, and there's no way that sleep can help your tummy problems. But I don't know. Like, I don't know, and that brings me to one thing, and I don't know how I'm going to track this necessarily. Like, I might try, but one of the things I'm curious about whether or not this will help when I do like the the more like kind of scheduled meal timing and work on my circadian rhythm and movement. When I work on those couple of things for the next few months and kind of make some gradual changes, I'm curious if my motility is going to change. Because I've shared before on this podcast that I've tended to gravitate more towards constipation in more recent years.
Mm.
And up until I had my ear surgery, I felt like I had it mostly under control. Like it was definitely a tendency,
Right.
but I wasn't finding the need to like take something for constipation very frequently. And then I feel like either, the antibiotics that I had with the surgery, which definitely without a shadow of a doubt affected my microbiome. Like I proved that pretty definitively. and posted some YouTube videos on that topic. So because I live in Satan's armpit, and I try to turn off the HVAC when we're recording, so there's not a lot of background noise. My husband and daughter were out at the store, and I figured, oh, I can leave that door open and get like a little bit more ventilation so my room doesn't heat up. Apparently, they came home.
Oh, right.
So, but good God, what was I talking about before though, Amy? Unsexy basics. Oh, just I'm curious to see if my bowel habits become more regular when my schedule is more regular. And I don't expect it to be like an overnight or
Right.
or like an instant thing. Like, oh, I've had a good circadian rhythm for 1 week and I'm still having trouble. Gosh darn it. Like, I think this is going to be months in the making, but I am kind of curious if that's going to be a factor for me.
Yeah. Well, it's a
Again,
good,
knowing the philosophical importance of this and that's been one of my struggles. So,
yeah, I'd be really curious too. I mean, it's a good point to remember also that you might want to be more focused on implementing strategies than outcomes, at least at the beginning. Like, it's very awesome to kind of assess outcomes maybe 3, 6 months into doing a habit. But, a lot of times when you start moving or something, you're like, oh, it's been a week. Have I dropped any weight or
yeah.
do I feel better? Am I sleepy? And it's like, well, I'm sure there's still going to be, your body's going to need more consistency to really make changes. And you might still feel better. I always feel better when I move in general. If I have a day where I'm just a total veg, I don't feel quite as good. But
Well,
so you
like that
could,
day that we were moving a lot and then I slept great that night.
right,
Sometimes it is that fast, but
right,
oftentimes it's not.
right, right. So yeah, I mean, just give it some time to. I mean, it's something that we both probably struggle with too because we're human beings and we want it to be a jiffy of a change.
We want everything to be instant, and
Yeah.
that's perfectly human. I thought of one other work in progress thing that I'm
Yeah.
working on at the moment, if I may share.
Oh, yes, please.
So again, going back to the iron thing. So,
Yeah.
so Amy's been on this
I
ride
know this
with me,
iron journey.
right? This journey. I've tried to increase my iron through my diet, and every 3 to 6 months I'm remeasuring ferritin.
Mhm.
And to be clear, my ferritin's not terrible. It's been in like the 40-ish range. It's just that's low for me. Up
Right.
until about 2020, my ferritin was really solid. And then it was like May of 2020 was the first time I saw my ferritin dip into like the 30 or 40 range. And I thought, huh. And I've just been loosely, slowly working on it. Because again, I know that things take time. I'm not going
Right.
to eat more iron and then check my ferritin a month later. That would be silly Billy of me to do. So I thought for sure I had it figured out. Do you remember how confident I was? I'm
Oh,
sending
yeah.
this girl Marco Polos, and I'm like, this is it, Amy. This is it.
I know.
And I realized that probably around that same time, I started taking a magnesium supplement. And I was like, this is it, man. Magnesium inhibits iron absorption. This is it. So I discontinued the magnesium supplement for 3 months, and my ferritin went down. And I was like, gosh darn it. So I was so perplexed afterwards. And I remember Marco Poloing you just bewildered, like,
I
I
think you
thought this was
opened the
it.
results. You opened
Yes.
your LabCorp results on camera with me, and
Yeah.
you were like, "Oh," it
Like,
was
you're
just the
kidding.
letdown of,
Yeah.
yeah,
And it was
I remember
just
that.
like, all right, back to the drawing board. So anyway, so I thought I had it figured out. And then I don't know why, because we've talked about this on the podcast a million times. And I talk about this all the time in FODMAP Freedom and my work, but I had this realization of stomach acid. And here's why I never thought of it before. I have no symptoms of low stomach acid from a digestive standpoint. Like, I don't have indigestion, the feeling like food sits like a brick of lead in my gullet and doesn't move. I don't have GERD. I don't have bloating. I don't have any of the symptoms that would normally tip me off. The one and only digestive symptom that could be a symptom of this, I guess, is constipation. But oftentimes when I find people respond positively to betaine HCl, it's usually not like only constipation. Usually they have other indicators that they have low
Right.
stomach acid. So anyway, I just kind of had this epiphany where I was like, maybe I just don't have digestive symptoms of low stomach acid. But
Mm.
May 2020, we all remember what happened that year, right? And that was the beginning of the world's biggest cluster, you know what? And stress was obviously a huge player. And I think maybe I had some crispy adrenals to begin with, and then the pandemic came along and crisped them even further.
Mm.
And then my ability to make stomach acid went down and it just hadn't recovered yet. So anyway, right now, as of the recording of this episode, I'm in a 3-month experiment. I'm being patient. It's really hard, but I'm just taking betaine HCl and I'm occasionally taking some bitters when I think of it. And I'm going to do that for 3 months and I'm going to see if that brings up my ferritin. If that doesn't work, I don't know. I'm back to the drawing board. I have no idea why else this would be. But I'm very curious to see if my betaine HCl experiment will do the trick. But
Yeah.
that's something I'm kind of working on. And this, I'll share kind of a fun little tool real quick. I, despite my profession, am not super duper diligent about taking supplements and pills. I'm very just like all over the place with it. I also have noticed that I have to have the pill bottles out on the counter and I never move them from the counter. If I
Mm.
have them, like we had them kind of on a shelf in the pantry for a while so that the counter looked nicer, but I never took them
Right.
because even though I go in the pantry every single day, it was like just out of sight, out of mind enough that I wouldn't take
Right.
my stuff. So I have to have everything out on the counter. But the other thing that I'm doing, in part for data collection for a future YouTube video, when I prove this hypothesis to be true, but also just for like my own sake, is I'm using a habit tracker app. And I do like it. It's called Ulti Self, like ultimate self,
Mm.
ULTISELF. It's a paid app. It's normally kind of expensive. I think it would normally be like $80, but I Googled like Alti Self coupon code and I came across a New York Post article and the coupon code still worked.
Wow.
So I got it for like $20 instead of 80. So Google it and see if you can find that coupon code still. But this is what it looks like. And you can see I've
Nice.
got what's on there. Yoga, wake up early, take HCl, take B complex, take vitamin D. And then when you click on one, so for example, I woke up somewhat, or I'm going to give myself a point for this one today. All right, ready? Ready for the dopamine hit? It's probably not even focused.
Yeah.
Wait for it. Boom! You
Coffee.
get a little like trophy thing. And then if you get all of your numbers for a week, like if I forget. I think I put wake up early like 3 times a week was my goal. And if I did that on the third one, it would actually do this huge dopamine thing where it's like, hooray! And it's confetti. And it like throws confetti and says, you did it! A goal achieved. So that's a huge fun thing. But anyway, I put take HCl on that tracker app. And then my goal is 3 times a day, which would be every single meal. I'll tell you right now, I don't hit that all the time, but it feels very good when I hit that metric and get 3 in a row. I'm trying to do it mostly with meals that contain protein and meals that contain iron. That's obviously the more important, but anyway, yeah. So if I prove this to be the case, I will post a YouTube video. I don't remember when my 3-month experiment concludes. I think sometime late September, early October, maybe. If it's a
Oh
bust, I won't
man.
do a YouTube video about it. But if it proved to be useful and
Everyone's gonna
correct,
be
then
marking their calendars.
that's right. That's right. I mean, I have a reminder on my phone of when it's been 3 months and I'm allowed to order the blood work, but try to be patient until then. That's my other one. And if it turns out that my hypothesis is true and I do have low stomach acid, then it becomes a question of, all right, what do I do about it, assuming I don't want to take betaine HCl for the rest of my days?
Right.
So we might have to do an updated betaine HCl episode
Yeah.
down the road if that happens to be the case for me. We'll see.
Yeah. We'll have to reconvene,
But again, if
reassess.
to bring it full circle real quickly, if you think about it, at least how I teach it in FODMAP Freedom is like, I call it digestion dominoes. I don't remember if I came up with that term or if I learned it from someone else, but it's like the first domino has to fall over before the second
Mm.
one falls over, and then the
Yep.
third one falls over. And a lot of people think that stomach acid is the first domino, but it's not.
Mm.
Experiencing your food and more of like the mindful eating kind of stuff is. And I would also make the argument that eating at about the same time every day is
Hmm.
also part of that first domino. So,
Right.
again, maybe the movement, the sleep, the eating at regular intervals, the first three things I shared in the beginning of this episode, maybe those are the things I need to do to address hypothesized low stomach acid, which will then address kind of moderately crummy ferritin.
Right.
I don't know. One way to find out, but
Ooh, stay tuned.
oh, the web we weave, Amy. Oh,
I
the web
know.
we weave.
I know. My bladder's about to bust.
All right. Well, we don't
On that
want
note,
we don't want any
busting
waterfalls here.
bladders.
Although, can we it say I'm wearing my Ithaca is gorgeous T-shirt right now, and there's a waterfall because there's a lot of waterfalls and gorgeous in Ithaca. So how perfect that you're thinking of creating your own little Niagara Falls right now. And
Oh
here I
Lord.
have a waterfall on my shirt. So
When we went there, or I
yeah, we
should say you
just
went
all
there.
wrapped up with a
Yeah.
bow on top. Well, guys, like I said, it was the kiss of death when I said this was going to be a short little 45-minute episode. It turned out to not be, but I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. And you can ask us every now and then how these goals are coming along. Keep us honest. The power of announcing what you're working on will surely be helpful for us. And we will talk about something a little bit more nerdy and academic, I think, next time. So stay tuned until that episode drops. Toodaloo.